You're listening to the Gate of Trust podcast. Join hosts Matt Trush and Felix Friedberg's heart-to-heart conversations with artists, entrepreneurs, scholars, and laymen who, by strengthening their trust in God despite all odds, experience outright miracles. Trusting in God can literally save lives. And now, Gate of Trust podcast hosts Matt and Felix.
Hi, I'm Matt.
And I'm Felix.
And this is the Gate of Trust podcast.
Hey, Matt, earlier this week, I went to my lawyer's office, and he's just sitting there smiling, not a word. He points to a sign on his desk. It says, "Ask me about my new rates." So I sit down and I ask him, "So what are your new rates?" He says, $150 for 3 questions. 3 questions for $150? Doesn't that seem a little steep? He looks at me. He nods. He says, "Yes. And what is your 3rd question?"
Felix, I'm almost afraid to ask this question, but who's on the podcast today?
Matt, for no extra charge, today we have Winslow Swart on the Gate of Trust podcast. I've known Winslow for almost 30 years. He's a martial arts master in Kenseido, author of The Resilient Leader, and founder/chief inspiration officer of the 1 Million Dreams app.
Winslow seamlessly integrates East and West, leveraging what he learned in Japan and his new life dedicated to Yiddishkeit, Chassidus, and now Bitachon Trust.
Winslow still runs his dojo. He's an avid cyclist and a father of 5 wonderful girls.
Maybe I can even pick up some martial arts moves on today's podcast, Felix.
I'm not sure about that, Matt, but here is the inspirational Winslow Swart. Welcome to Gate of Trust podcast. We're here with Winslow Swart, and I'm going to do some bragging on Winslow. Winslow is the Chief Inspiration Officer at Winslow Consulting. It's the business of human performance, and he's the Executive Director of Kenseido headquarters with the dojo in San Antonio, where he trains adults and children of all ages, and famously trains several of the world champion San Antonio Spurs. I may live in Houston, but I'm still a fan of the world champion San Antonio Spurs. He has a BA in psychology and organizational development and an MA in administration and organizational development, and has also done doctoral work in management and organizational leadership. Winslow is a business and personal consultant and has not only coached celebrities and politicians, but advises governmental agencies and corporations on leadership and people development. Most recently, Winslow is the CEO of the 1 Million Dreams app, where he is in the process of revolutionizing individuals to help them set and achieve life's biggest dreams. He's also an author. He's written a book called The Resilient Leader. In addition to all of these things, Winslow is a husband, a father, a grandfather, and I'll let him tell us more about how he's merged Judaism, martial arts, organizational development, all of that with the trust and bitachon.
Winslow, before you say anything, I just have to say you sound like the most incredible person I've ever heard of in my life. You were a Renaissance man and athlete and author and philosopher and all these things. Can't wait to hear more all about you and your story of Bitachon Trust.
Thanks, guys. After that introduction, that's all the time we have, and thank you for joining us.
That's all the time. Just do it.
Yeah, so many topics. I think, obviously, the core topic is Bitachon, but how it lives for all of us and what we learn from it and how we can perhaps navigate some of our challenges as we reach for more. So God gave us the gift of chazon, a vision. And as Shimon Peres says, that for him, dreaming is just being practical. So from a Jewish perspective, we are a nation of dreamers and doers. And I think in our DNA, we have that risk-taking faculty. We're entrepreneurs, I call machlers, whatever. We challenge ourselves to sometimes create something out of nothing. And that brings up a lot of different, not just practical challenges of business and life, but emotional and spiritual, psychological challenges. So I think this is where Bitachon really comes in, where we have to have not just faith, but really have to have trust that we have a partner as we manifest and live into our dreams and stand in the future, that we're not doing it alone. And that's one of the beauties of this concept of Bitachon is if we trust in other things for our success, the economy, the client base, the toolkit, our own skills and knowledge, abilities and talents, then when things don't go well, it can bring almost like a lot of anxiety and frenzy. But when we do have this bitachon, when we do trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then we can even have a sense of calm that even when we have a setback in the startup world, there's something called Valley of Death, where we may have a high burn rate and not enough funding to get us to the next milestone. And people pivot and exit and freak out a lot of times at that point. But when you really believe and have confidence and faith and trust in your mission and your partnership with God, you get through it. I think everyone can relate to times where it doesn't always go your way. But then when we get to that point where it does work out, we realize when we look in the rear view mirror, we see that Hashem has always been there. But sometimes when we're in the middle of it, it's hard to see. And that's where this whole conversation is really important. It's a gut check that we have God in our corner, especially when we put him front and center.
That's amazing. You've really internalized these concepts of Bitachon, and since you're in the startup world and so you have all these amazing ventures that you are launching yourself, you've seen it, you've been there, you've done it, you've lived it. And I think that, again, started from the fact that it's A, in our spiritual DNA, and B, when being faced with those setbacks, facing the valley of death, if you will, that if you could just continue to have faith, that's when the miracles can actually happen. If you, as I like the words you use it, if you freak out and you run, then you're probably going to short sell your dreams. And it's very practical if you're at the negotiating table and there's somebody discussing an acquisition. If they smell blood, the sharks are going to take you for lunch.
Then you're dealing with vulture capital, not venture capital, right?
Right. So tell us more. I'm so excited about what you said so far.
To be clear, just because I have an understanding of this doesn't mean I don't have to remind myself of this, because day to day, week to week, month to month, I can be confronted with things where the human side factor will take over. And in social psychology, we refer to something called having an external locus of control, which is the stuff happens to you mindset, right? Everything's out there. And the internal locus of control is where you check into what's controllable, what one can influence and impact, and what's uncontrollable, and have some peace with that. But next level is the bitachon, where we know it's not a solopreneurial thing. Solopreneurs is a kind of idea of individual practitioners or starting it up by themselves. And none of us are solopreneurs when we have bitachon in Hashem. And I think that's really a cool formula for getting through. And yet we have our CFOs, we have our wife, and we have, when I say CFO, I do mean my wife. So we have our partnerships, but I think that this spiritual thing really gives us that equilibrium that we need, which is internal. And in the martial arts, we learn how to maybe physiologically check into that through our breathing and our centering, and which helps our mindset. And we can reduce the cortisol levels in our body, the fear hormone, and elevate the confidence hormones and all this kind of stuff through things we do energetically. But I think that the cognitive and emotional and spiritual piece is really important, that it's not just a physical property. And you guys were talking about earlier about looking east for our wisdom. I've written some articles in the past, and so have many others, about how so many of the concepts that are supposedly Eastern are in the Torah. And they just a little bit reconfigured. When Abraham sent his sons east with gifts, he gave them gifts of chokhmah. And you can see how things that are inherent to the wisdom of Torah have been expanded in Eastern philosophy and practices in slightly different ways. And so that we can look at that and go, oh yeah, and it reminds us of some of those things, some of our own legacy of knowledge and wisdom.
So I don't know if Felix told you this, but I spent 15 years living in Asia. I have a master's from Harvard in Asian studies, and my whole life was bent upon learning about Asian wisdom and all of that spirituality that is seemingly out there. And lo and behold, it was when I was in Shanghai that I met Chabad and realized that all of the things that I'd been searching for, I already had back home in Yiddishkeit. So that's when I started to learn and go to yeshiva and become more observant and all these things. But really, I think there is a tendency of a Yid to always search for spirituality. And if he's not finding it home, sometimes he travels all the way to the other side of the world only to realize that what he was looking for was in his back pocket. So I would like to know if your story with Kenseido was a similar story. Or do you have a different path?
Absolutely. About 36 years ago, I was running my dojo. I was teaching 20 classes a week, hundreds of students, doing it all week long, and was competing and going to Japan, and had spent a life of studying since I was 4 years old studying this stuff, right? Early 60s or whatever. And this was like part of my DNA and the Tao and different philosophies in a practical way. I was studying Eastern spirituality, and through the art was the vehicle. And then some Chabad Hasidim came by, looked in the window one day and said, hey, that guy looks like a Jew. And I look at them and I say, those guys look like Hasids. And I didn't know I was allowed to talk to them. I was very secular at the time. And they invited me for a Shabbos, and I thought it was interesting because my parents survived the Shoah, and we were raised very secular after they left Europe, and we weren't raised with Yiddishkeit. And very early on, I started to learn with the Shliach here with Rabbi Block, started to learn Tanya. And all right away, I went, whoa. Wait a minute, we have this stuff in Judaism too? Right? But I got lit about Judaism because of the spiritual teachings in the spiritual philosophy. That whole toolkit opened it up for me. And then later I got into the other attributes and relearned my own Masorah, our own traditions. And so I'm a Baal Tshuva with Chabad. And that was a beautiful moment that I still clearly remember. And it informs me to this day.
Very cool. Winslow, I wanted to go back and touch on something you talked about, and that is the ability to stay focused on your faith. I've got a son who's a policeman, and they talk about like when you're in the heat of the moment, police, and when we're all in high stress situations, there's like a tunnel vision that comes on. And so talking about the startup world and other challenges, how is it that you're able in those situations when you do have that sort of tunnel vision where you might be thinking so much about the challenge? How is it that you pull your faith into that? How do you bring that in?
The Rambam talked about the importance of suspension of breath. And what did he mean by that? It was like when you master your breathing, right? Another level of ruach, that we bring in through our breathing, we can connect to our inner calm and our core courage. Our locus of control is internal, and then it calms down all of those kind of fear-triggered responses, right? So our situational awareness is improved. You have to get into a zone when you're facing threats where the amygdala is being triggered and hyperstimulated. So I think that this being able to breathe is really important. I think also when we're in tefillah, when we pray, if we breathe, we can be more in the moment. So it's not just when we're in the front lines. To be the calm in the eye of the storm, there's a concept in Japanese called fudoshin, to be the calm in the eye of the storm. And I think that it's so interesting how, as a nation, as a people, you look how Israel's surrounded by Hamas, Hezbollah, the threat of Iran and other things. And then even closer to home is just in town, we have threats. So you could have a lot of PTSD just living in Israel or being a Jew connected to Israel. And we have to have that sort of that heart set, mindset, and soul set of we are supposed to be here and this is our moment. And that could be, let's say, physical in a self-defense scenario or in a broader sense as a people. And just going back to that, as we were sending our kids to school in Israel over the past many years, all 5 of my daughters went to seminary and 4 of them have made Aliyah since. Every time they were there were times where they were running for shelters and there were missiles. And I know we have the Iron Dome, but there's 2 Iron Domes, right? There's the one which is rocket-based, and then there's the one which is God-based. But at the same time, for us not to freak out, we have to connect to our inner strength, the Hazak V'Hamatz, that is also part of our DNA, the strength, the courage. We connect to it through breathing, though, I think, really, physically, and then also through mindset. Our awareness of that bitachon is not just something we talk about.
That is a great answer. I think that's very helpful. I know that I'm going to think about that and implement that myself, and I love it. As you're thinking back, obviously, having my own child living in Israel, I understand exactly how you feel and how you think. What would you say in all your various experiences would be the biggest example of faith and that had maybe the most surprising, wonderful outcome?
I do. I think it's a practical one, and it's a little bit materialistic. When I ran my dojo, before I became full-blown Baal Tshuva, my wife was already keeping Shabbos and Yantif and Alessandra. They were Shomer Shabbos before me. I would be like every other Shabbos or every other Yantif or whatever, because Friday and Saturday were my money days at the dojo. Friday was fight night, and Saturday classes were packed, and those were my money days. And to give up Friday and Saturday was a huge leap of faith initially, and trust that we don't profit from working on Shabbos, Yontif, that it doesn't benefit a Jew to do that. And so that was a big transformation, and it worked out. It was challenging. It was a struggle. But if I hadn't done that, what kind of example would I have set for 5 daughters going to public high school in a town where Yiddishkeit was sparse and no kosher place to eat? None of their peers were keeping Shabbos and Yontif. All of the things that you can't do if you're an athlete, which they were. You miss regionals and you miss all these things everyone else is doing at first. And then later, what they missed, which is glad, is the social ways that their peers conducted themselves. And when you have daughters, you probably know what I mean, that they had the core strength, because my daughters learned that Shabbat was not negotiable in our household. But it was always fun. It was never something we said, oh, yeah, that's not kosher. It was never negative. It was always a positive. And their friends would come over and go, wow, this is great. I wish we did that at my house. You know how many of my daughter's friends have actually become religious and also wound up making Aliyah? Because not only our household, there are others where they found out being Jewish is really fun and fulfilling and cool, and we can do that too. But I think that the big piece was, for the big payoff for me, was raising 5 beautiful from a Yidden girls that I didn't have to have some of the worries that my peers had with their kids that had a different experience socially. Right. So like coming to that, I think that to me is like the big reward is we've got 4 grandchildren born in Jerusalem, and how rewarding it is. Yeah. And how rewarding it is for those that we lost in the Shoah and those that survived, that this is, and I mentioned this one time in a 10 talk at Chabad, what was taken away from us during the Shoah has now oddly been, much of that is being restored to us in Yerushalayim and in Eretz Yisrael with these next generations, this Lador Vador thing that's happening. But anyway, going back to it, giving up Shabbos, trusting God that we would not lose our house, we would not lose our business. This was like, we're going back 30 years ago. It was a big deal, but the best investment we ever made was in Torah and mitzvahs.
That's beautiful.
Really beautiful story. When you go back and look at Jewish American history, so many that came to the States post-World War I, World War II, much of the retail world and a lot of what got built was Jews not necessarily doing that. Like they had stores and they had businesses and they built their business, and for some, they realized later that maybe they could have done it differently. But the fact that you realized that and took action is really inspirational, and it's something that as people hear this, I think will inspire others. So thank you for sharing that. But that was a difficult decision. What put you over? That's a big decision. Like you said, that was when you made your most money. How were you able to bridge that decision?
I think a lot of people have the same experience. In fact, my son-in-law, his parents will probably tell you the same thing. When they became from, right? When they became Bali Tshuva. It's when your kids went to the Gan at Chabad and they come home and say, Tati, what are you doing? It's Muktzah. Yeah. You know? And this is like, it's from our children, from the voices, from their lips to God's ears to our hearts. Right. What can you do, man? Our force shields are useless against them.
No, I agree. We had the same situation where our Noah, when we were driving out the gate of Chabad on Saturday, and he would hunker down below the chair because he didn't want the counselors from camp to see him in the car driving on Shabbos. So 100% true. Our children can lead us, and we make these life-changing decisions, and it's all from Hashem, and it's wonderful.
Hey, Felix, how's your day job going?
Really great, Matt.
What's up?
Well, you know, Matt, in recruiting, there's lots of steps between talking with the client, working with the candidate, and the actual shidduch working out where you get a deal.
You sound more like a matchmaker than a recruiter, Felix.
That's exactly right, Matt. Except in the past, at each stage, after each date, I'd worry just a little bit that there wouldn't be another date. One would say the wrong thing to the other, and the deal would fall apart.
And now?
And now I realize that God has given me these skills, and if I use the skills he gave me 100% with all the right intentions, the deal works out. And that's what's been happening. No worries and more closed deals.
That's awesome, Felix. I told you so.
You got it, Matt. Now back to Winslow.
So it sounds like you yourself are living the dream. So tell me about your 1 Million Dreams app, because it sounds like it's transforming the world.
If you go to 1milliondreams.me, all spelled out, there's a nice little couple-minute clip that sort of tells the story. It's a montage. I didn't realize I was always in the dream business, as in leadership development and team building and as a sensei, helping people achieve their boldest aspirations in business and in life and personally, articulating and framing it. The TED Talk that I did is called Goals Suck, Dreams Are Epic, which is also easily searched, which really transforms the idea from not just doing what we have to do and what we ought to do, but doing what we really want to do and living into what intrinsically motivates us and with purpose and autonomy and mastery, like really expanding on the things that drive us, but also the efficacy piece, that things that not only fulfill us, but change the world and make it a better place, or on some whatever scale that is, right? Small or large. But the toolkit, the Dream app, and we did a lot of workshops before we started building the mobile platform, which is going back live on the app stores pretty soon. We reeled it back in. We have another version we're building. But we learned from our workshops, the dream sessions we did, dream retreats for employees, for corporate groups, for at-risk youth in the inner city, how effective it was. And if we don't build the mobile app, then this will never scale and we won't be able to help everyone. And reaching people where they live on their remote devices, which now becomes more important than ever because of remote work and pandemics and stuff like that. Really getting people engaging, students engaging employees in things that are bigger than just the mundane and the required. This has been giving so many people a real boost in their life, and I've got a really long list of people who have done epic things with the programs. When we close this round and scale this, there'll be more wonderful story, but I can't tell you how happy I am to be in the dream business because I have a front row seat to these impacts all the time. It's a very Jewish business, but it doesn't call itself that, right?
It's amazing. How do you get someone who, let's say, feels they're stuck in their 9-to-5 day job and all of a sudden unlock what their dream is and then to execute upon it and then take a whole new path in life, or maybe stay what they're doing, but in a way that's internally motivated in that they see that it's actually them fulfilling their dreams, not just them getting a paycheck?
So the roadmap to that can be doing incremental things that they had been just put off, didn't get around to it because it wasn't prioritized because it was too busy. When you prioritize a few things, and they can be investing in oneself or family or fun or whatever. They don't have to be the big epic things. They can be very moderate dreams, but it's about getting some momentum and inertia around that and then proving to oneself like, wow, this feels really good. And then at the same time working on some of those more intermediate and larger aspirations. And so it's building some confidence in it, I think is really important. Because we do have these self-imposed limitations and we talk ourselves out of stuff. One of the quotes that I used because it came from one of my dream mentees after working together on this for a while with their cohort, it was a city employee. And she said, I used to come to work for a paycheck, but now I come to work on my dreams.
Nice.
And it was like a beautiful reconfiguration, right? And I love that. And also, something you'll see that I'll mention is changing what it means to be sent to the office, which is that right. Whole dynamic in school where it's positively driven. But go ahead.
So really, it seems like what you're doing is you're taking these ideas, these thoughts that we're talking about, and you're manifesting them to the general public through this app where people are taking their mundane and they're seeing a higher purpose. They're seeing a higher level. Like you said, it could be something new, something big, something grand, but it may be adding bigness, grandness, gratitude to what you have and what you're doing, and then just seeing more rewards from it. Is that a little bit like how things are transforming for people?
Absolutely. And I think that reframing how we work not as individuals, but also as teams. Are we coming here just to meet quotas? Are we coming here just to achieve certain objectives? Or are we building a culture of dreamers and doers? Are we working on, while we're doing the things that we have to do to drive our results and the business outcomes, what are we doing individually and collectively that gets us excited? And we're doing this too, and this is awesome. And people own what they create. That's a really interesting dynamic when we all get to be co-authors and architects of these kind of what's next for ourselves and for others with one another. It's not only individual, but it's collaborative. So I think it changes the whole vibe, really.
When we're discussing about how do we deal with getting in the zone when we're under a high-pressure situation, you said breathe. Let's get people to work on their dreams. It was, let's do the steps in the app. So I hear a lot of mechanics in both cases. We're talking about breathe, that has to do with the physicality of it. Say, let's go through the steps of setting goals in the app, etc. That's, again, maybe the physicality of it all. How are you taking the concepts of Bitachon Trust and giving the people or empowering the people with those powerful notions so that they can go ahead and dream?
Yeah, this is interesting. I think the unfreezing, right? In organizational psychology, we talk about unfreezing an organization, and we have to also unfreeze ourselves. We get stuck. So that's where kind of the breakthrough is. Any kind of action is better than no action. But I think there's a very interesting, and it's also a very Jewish concept, is when we're having a lot of fear and anxiety and stress and struggle, we're usually looking inward and just thinking about ourselves. And one of the best ways to disrupt that is like when you do mitzvahs, when you do for others. And I really see this in whether working on dreams or just anything day to day. Many of our dreams are about ourselves, but the best ones are about everyone else where we're invested in it. And this is where we really get our superpowers. And that's where we can tap into Torah because there's all sorts of ways we can do that. We don't have to make up anything, but what we're passionate about and care about and where we're needed most. Like the Lubavitcher Rebbe, one time lectured a guy that was having all these issues. He says, you're so busy worried about what you need, you haven't begun to think about what you're needed for, right? This is where we really expand our superpowers. So going into battle, not just for ourselves, but for others, this gives us courage and strength, right? Whether it be in law enforcement, I'm doing this to protect my people, this individual, this community, my nation, my family, whatever. This is where we transcend everything. I think in terms of mindset, heart set, when we partner with Hashem, like at Shul, I was for many years the Rosh Bitachon. We have a security team. I'm sort of the Shani now. I passed a little bit of it on. You'll do anything when you're doing it for the others. You'll put yourself in the line of fire because it's not just about you. And I think that's a superpower. I think that's my answer.
I think you've revealed a very important secret. If we put what you just said into the words of the case I gave you, it all starts to make sense. Someone who comes to work for a paycheck is thinking about me. How do I get what I need? All of a sudden, if that same person comes and does the same job, and he's not thinking about himself, he's thinking about others. How do I serve others? How do I bring my skills to improve the world in whatever way it might be or fulfill a greater dream? Then people are tapping into leaving their self-centeredness and thinking about how do they contribute to this world. And then that bittul, if you will, gives them the opportunity to tap into trusting in God and to hopefully doing greater things for others, helping others.
Absolutely. When people hear this podcast, it will be another day sometimes. It's Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, which is the time where we can celebrate again because the plague against Rabbi Kiva's students ended. What was the plague from? They were arguing from a standpoint of their own like self-interest, ego, like I'm right, you're wrong thing. They were just respecting each other. And it was like a huge avera the way that was going on. It was a big transgression. So there were a lot of those that were struck with this plague and died. And it ended when they changed their heart set and mindset about when they were learning and arguing Torah, that it wasn't about me being smarter or right. It was Shem Shemaim for the sake of heaven. And this kind of brought me, when I was looking at the Sphira, every day we count the Omer, there's certain characteristics and attributes that are godly that are also in us. And today the Sphira is Hod Shebechod. It's the humility of humility. And it's like, why is it this one? And it should be something more glamorous. It could be something about Malchut or Netzach, one of these other loftier characteristics. But this is the deepest form of humility is when you're making room for others and making room for God.
Where the greatest joy comes on the day when we have the greatest humility.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. And so Bitachon, it's a humble thing to say, I'm not the boss of everything and I'm not necessarily the boss of myself or everything in my life. And yeah, I made money and yes, I bought or built this house, but knowing that we didn't do it alone. And doing it for the sake of everything should be a Kiddush Hashem, that we can sanctify God in what we do and how we do it and in our place. This is huge. Today I'm really meditating on being less of, hey, this is the guy, the motivational guru or the sensei, and taking a real step back and creating more space for God and for other wonderful things to happen.
No, Winslow, you're the dream guy. You're the dream guy. You're helping people see and achieve dreams.
And creating space for that, so in the most positive way.
Absolutely. Winslow, this has been an amazing time with you to get to know you better, and not only for us to get to know you better, but for everyone really to get to know who you are and what you're about. I think what you've done, what you've accomplished, and what you have yet to accomplish with Hashem's help is amazing. And your beautiful family, your growing business, and the way that you're putting your thoughts and your dreams and using that energy to help others is helping you to be successful, obviously. So continued success from strength to strength. Thank you so much for being with us. And thank you so much on this Lag BaOmer for sharing those additional thoughts as well.
I want to say I really appreciate you having this platform where we can have this intersection of our spiritual life with how it really lives in our daily life, which should be one and the same. And just want to back at you, Hazak, Vinit, Hazek. I really appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Winslow.
Thanks, brothers. Thank you so much.
Matt, what a great conversation with Winslow. He really shared some insights. I was blown away. I've known him for over 30 years, but clearly I didn't fully know him. He was able to really share some thoughts and some ideas and some dreams that he's making real for himself and really helping others make real for themselves.
Very inspirational, somebody who came from being a sensei to being a world inspirational leader and bringing the nekudas, bringing the soul of Bitachon Trust and Yiddishkeit to a larger audience and to inspire them as well to follow their dreams. I think it's contagious and it's inspirational, and I think the world will be transformed as a result. Speaking of dreams, Felix, is that exclusive 25% off promo code still available?
You bet it is, Matt.
Gated Trust listeners can still use the exclusive promo code TRUST, TRUST, on kahat.com to get 25% off the Gate of Trust book.
And leave a 5-star rating and subscribe to gateoftrust.org/podcast to enter a raffle to win a free copy of the book.
Hey, Felix, have you ever done martial arts?
You know, speaking of martial arts, when we first got married, Sandy and I signed up for a karate class. We got the uniforms, the white belts. We went to a few classes, and after a few weeks, it was time to sign up for the big tournament and get really serious. We were afraid we'd never make it past white belt, so at the time, we hung up our uniforms and we never went back. We were thinking we're probably going to get stuck with those 7-year-olds forever. Fast forward 30 years later, now we're studying the Gate of Trust together on Shabbos, and in a few weeks, I'm really certain we're going to be yellow belts.
Felix, I think you and Sandy are on the way to being Gate of Trust black belts.
Hiya!
Thank you for listening to the Gate of Trust podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, leave a rating, and share the podcast with the people you love. To access today's show notes, ask Matt and Felix a question, or suggest the Gate of Trust story to be featured on the show, visit gateoftrust.org/podcast.
You think you got it under control, you're on a roll, living it up, living your dreams. But when it all goes bust at the seams, then you scream and cry to the one